when you see with a universal perspective, you notice and you basically feel that no, my personality is actually quite small, no matter how, as a matter of fact, the bigger you tend, the saying about like arrogance and stuff, the bigger you think your personality is, the smaller it probably really is.
Get up, everybody move.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Sol Xprsn here, your host for Get Your Mind Right. And on this episode of Get Your Mind Right, we're going to dig into something that's very, very powerful, in my opinion, and in my findings, you could say, on my spiritual journey. You see, a lot of times there's like two separate perspectives that we can take. And so I want to talk about the difference between a personal perspective and your universal perspective in today's video. So welcome, again, my name is Sol Xprsn, and let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing to know about a universal perspective is that everything begins to work for you when you have the right attitude. Okay. Oh, and by the way, I have my notes right here on the right, so that's what I'm looking at. But basically, when you take on the right attitude, everything begins to work for you. Your attitude toward the things you experience and the things you think about is the force that shapes your advantages, the things, whether or not things will go in your favor. It's your attitude that has this power, or actually, which is this force, the force that shapes whether or not things work in your favor. I say here, now when you're hearing this, there might be a false assumption in your mind about what I mean when I say you or your perspective. You are not your body or your personality. Okay? You're not just what you pay conscious attention to and this mechanism of your mind that scans for irregularities and is otherwise very natural, unless it scans and it finds irregularities or danger or something. You're not simply that, small aspect of yourself. You are much more than that. And your personality may seem a bit larger, but when you see with a universal perspective, you notice and you basically feel that no, my personality is actually quite small, no matter how, as a matter of fact, the bigger you tend, the saying about like arrogance and stuff, the bigger you think your personality is, the smaller it probably really is. And so I wrote, but under my notes, I wrote a little excerpt that I'm going to read to you guys. And hopefully this brings some clarity around taking a universal perspective versus just a personal perspective. The personal perspective versus the universal perspective is not even as practical to use. And yet, taking a universal perspective seems like a big feat, a big step towards spiritual maturity for most people, but it's actually just a regular, natural difference in a sincere, truth seeker and freedom seeker that begins to happen as you start to look at things from a more universal perspective. So I'm going to read this, and at the end of it, hopefully your perspective will have been expanded. Peace and love. Thank you. So you're not your body and personality. These aspects of yourself are simply arising in your awareness during your waking and dreaming states of consciousness. They do not define the totality of your beingness, and no mere aspects of yourself can ever define the totality of your beingness. When I say you in this way, I'm talking about your universal or subtle nature, not your egoic identity. Your most natural dynamic sense of being, sometimes called the personal I am, not to be confused with the pure awareness I am. We won't get into those differences in this video. So your most natural dynamic sense of being. When I say dynamic, it's the sense of being that's involved with activities and things, but is not attached to them, right? That can have a social life, that can have a personality, even that can have or multiple variants of a personality, can have possessions, can have fun with life, and yet all with detachment. If it all disappeared and was taken from him or her, tomorrow, no problem. Because this form of I am is simply, it's a winner already just from being alive, and anything it adds to that achievement is up to that. This, dynamic I am is very natural. It moves spontaneously with the freshness of life, and can use any situation or circumstance to its own advantage via the correct attitude. A universal perspective is only reached through the universal acceptance that you give yourself and your world. Your attitude literally shapes how good your world is to you. Now I say here, isn't it interesting that the very hands that shape our luck and advantages is our own attitude, something that we have complete control of? The current belief in most people is that a good attitude is important, but not directly shaping how things work out for us in life. It is until all fear of the unknown future is set aside that someone is blinded to the silver lining of misfortune. What I mean by that is that until you can kind of see with new eyes, until you're looking from a universal perspective, there's such an ingrained fear of incoming danger, fear of the future going wrong if I don't make the right choice, and if I don't control the next moment, and if I don't force things to be in a box that I've created as what things should be, okay, or what's right, what I think is right morally and just correct, right? This box. If I don't force my world into this box, then tomorrow is just going to come crashing down on my head and I'll die, right? Or just it'll basically everything will go to shit and I won't be able to be happy, okay? Which is the core desire, or the core of any desire is to be happy, to experience glee and joy and bliss. And so the current belief is that a good attitude is important, but not directly shaping how things work out. And it is until all fear of the unknown future is set aside that someone is blinded to the silver lining of misfortune. Because when you don't have fear of misfortune, of incoming danger, incoming failure, incoming defeat, if you don't have any fear of that, then when you're met with defeat, when you're met with misfortune of any kind, even if it's, and bless your heart if this is your experience, even if it's abuse of some kind, this misfortune, okay, can be seen from a universal perspective. And when you see it from a universal perspective, you are able to clearly see whatever advantages, whatever learning opportunities, whatever new skills and new awareness has come from your experience, and that you can use to better yourself, better your life, if you would go ahead and put in the work without the fear. So that's what I meant by that. Now, yet when that day arrives that you're seeing from new eyes, you no longer cling to the need to control the next moment. You somehow can see that what you think of your suffering is your suffering. What you think of your failure is your failure. So your attitude towards your world, when you meet temporary defeat or failure of some kind, begins to change. Failure becomes optimization data for the next try or the next invention or the next thing that you're going to do, right? Failure becomes optimization data. Temporary defeat becomes the end of a great game that you played and that you can now put down and you don't have to carry in your mind, right? The end of a great game that you played and can play again whenever you want because you aren't choosing regret and replaying your thoughts and anxious feelings in your mind over and over again. A universal perspective is the only perspective that will bypass any negative tendencies learned by your mind. Why is this? It's because a universal perspective accepts all things as what they are in the larger picture, without attaching identity, without saying, this is my failure, this was my mistake, without attaching any personal identity, anything that comes through life in the form of, you could say, a hard lesson or some sort of, pain comes with it or whatever, regular pain, right? There's no identity. This is my pain. No, there's pain. And there may be responses to the pain. Ow. But it's not, ow, this is bad. I hate this. I wish this wasn't happening. Right? Because then there's I. There's so much identity. There's so much claiming that this is in you. This is yours, basically. Because when you do that, your attitude will shape that, right? Coming back. Your attitude of this is mine, okay, will reflect itself in life as that situation coming back over and over and over again. So, story time. This is I believe it's a Zen koan, but I wrote what I could remember from the Zen koan off the top of my head, so there's some paraphrasing and stuff, maybe from, the first English translation or whatever. But there were two monks walking through a body of water which had been flooded and, risen higher. The water was higher than usual. Now, a lot of people go across this body of water to get to the other side and to go and do whatever they're doing on the other side of the water. But today it was a little higher than usual. And on their way across, they saw a woman who was struggling to get through to the other side and looking like she wanted their help, right? Because these were monks, they were, strong, they were getting through the water, no problem. And so she was kind of looking like she wanted their help. But she knew that monks are under strict rules not to touch a woman, and so she didn't ask out of respect. But to her surprise and delight, she was immediately picked up by one of the monks, thrown on his shoulder, and carried across to the other side of the water. And when they got out of the water, she bowed in gratitude. She went one way and the monks went the other way. And that was pretty much that. Now, the other monk kept an awkward and anxious silence and kind of embarrassed silence about him as they were walking for at least about 2 miles. And this was until he could not bear to hold in his thoughts anymore about what he just saw. And he said to the first monk that picked up the woman, he said, "Do you realize that you broke about 5 sacred laws by touching and carrying that woman like that?" To which the first monk replied, "Well, I put her down at the bank of the water, and you've been carrying her for at least 2 miles." You see, the universal perspective says, I will help her. Period. That's it. I'll help her out. While the personal perspective says, I have rules against doing what I think is right in this moment. I have barriers between me and doing what's right. And see that personal, you have to be able to discern, right, between the story you want to tell yourself and the story you want to live. Right? Maybe, it's okay that in a perfect world, when you choose to be a monk, it may be your story that you never run into a situation where you would have to break one of the sacred laws, and you just live in your temple, and you do what monks do, whatever your job is. You do your work, and you go to sleep every night, and you reach a state of pure enlightenment, pure awareness. That might be your story in terms of the one that you actually live, or in terms of the story that you tell yourself. But the one that you actually live, you might come across situations where you're tested to see if you really get it, right? Because what is enlightenment? When you reach enlightenment, you're no longer a monk. You may be a monk by what you wear and by other people's opinions, but you are simply the self. You are not, any definition of, constructs or human societal identities that you can take on. You're not any of those things once you reach the end goal of enlightenment. And so if you, as an enlightened being, are walking through the water and you see someone that needs help, you're not your first thought, that you don't experience any thoughts of, this is a woman, let me think about how many rules I'd be breaking if I helped her, right? You just help. And so we have to discern between whether or not to take the personal route or to take the universal perspective. And 99 times out of 100, taking the universal perspective will be much more advantageous and much more helpful to you and your world. So again, my name is Sol Xprsn. I hope that this really, helped clear some things up in your mind and body and soul. And I teach these things as a coach, as a lifestyle coach, and as a meditation coach as well. If you want to meditate and learn how to really take advantage of the benefits of meditation to create better mental habits, then holla at me in the contact us links in the description below. And I can't wait to see you all in the next video. Peace and love. So if you're new to Ufulu Child, make sure you subscribe to get more mind mastery content dropped straight into your YouTube feed. If you enjoyed today's episode of Get Your Mind Right, let me know by clicking that like button, and I can't wait to see you all in the next video. Peace and love.